One Piece, 10 characters with backstories more tragic than Luffy. Luffy's backstory is surprisingly light, especially compared to the tragedies faced by these One Piece characters. Oftentimes, the lead character of any given shonen anime will receive some sort of a tragic past, or at least in contrast with the rest of the cast. A tragic backstory not only allows the viewer to sympathize with the main character, but it also allows them to develop a connection based on said sympathy. More so, a character with a well-written backstory is more likely to grow steadily than their counterparts with a bad, or otherwise non-existent, backstory. One Piece, however, took this basic procedure and threw it right off the window. In comparison to the rest of the Straw Hat crew, and a good chunk of the series' characters for that matter, Luffy's backstory is unbelievably light. Any knowledgeable One Piece fan could name at least a few characters who meet the mark of having a worse backstory. Here are a few notable ones. 10. Senor Pink. Senor Pink's history is one that took everyone by surprise. No one would have expected a minor antagonist to have such a swift yet intricate backstory to them, although he was an irrelevant character in the grand scheme of things. Oda was able to elevate Senor Pink's status within the community by simply giving him a brief few panels long backstory. Let that sink in. Albeit briefly, the backstory about a husband who would do anything to see his wife smile truly did form a bridge between Senor Pink and the One Piece fandom. 9. Momonosuke. Momonosuke's backstory usually gets overlooked due to how it was sequenced in the story. He, an 8-year-old kid, weathered events that not even adults would be able to withstand. Momonosuke lost his parents, his home, and any sort of emotion that could be described as security. And atop of all that, he had to shoulder all these absurd expectations that all his retainers had, and still have for him. That is a lot for any child to shoulder. 8. Boa Hancock. There's never a context in which being a slave is not tragic. Boa Hancock, alongside her sisters, had to undergo that ordeal at the bold age of 7. Furthermore, what makes matters worse is the fact that they weren't regular slaves either. They were slaves to world nobles, the most miserable kind of slaves. Due to the wretched nature showcased by the majority of these world nobles, one can safely conclude that the experience of their slaves would be beyond tragic. Tragic enough to leave an everlasting scar on the Boa sisters. 7. Doflamingo. As evil as he is, young Doflamingo had to live through a childhood that no one should go through. Due to the awful treatment he and his family received from both peasants and nobles alike, he came to loathe the world. This intense resentment would later all be channeled into fueling Doflamingo's grand plan, world destruction. To be precise, the world shaped by the celestial dragons. Ultimately, it all comes down to revenge. 6. Ace. Most adoptive parents face the dilemma of coming out to their kids. More so if they chose to do so, they often do it when said children are relatively old. Monkey D. Garp, however, apparently had no qualms about confronting Ace about his shocking identity. It is worth remembering that Ace was younger than 8 years old at the time. While the audience might never know the motives behind Garp's actions, these actions played a massive role in Ace's miserable childhood. 5. Sanji. Before Whole Cake Island, fans assumed that Sanji had a tragic past, albeit we underestimated the severity of the aforementioned past. Oftentimes, getting rough treatment from one's family might be much harder than losing a loved one. Sanji's own father admitted to the fact that he tried to kill Sanji a few times but ended up changing his mind. That being said, despite all their past treatment, Sanji still chose to save his family. A testimony to his kindness. 4. Chopper. The tragic story of Chopper could be broken down into several smaller tragic pieces. His pre-human life where he was shunned by his herd, his post-human life where he was shunned by humans. And lastly, Dr. Hirulek's sad yet iconic passing. Chopper's backstory is most certainly one of the saddest among the Straw Hat crew. But having said so, most of its tragic elements laid in its emotionally charged narration. 3. Trafalgar Law. Trafalgar Law's past highlighted a very dark side to the world of One Piece. Just the young Law crawling out from a literal pile of corpses is enough to convey the misery he had to go through. Law was born in a country suffering from a rampant and badly understood disease that led to them being at war with other countries that feared it might spread. In all likelihood, Law would have lost himself without Rosinante's timely assistance. By sacrificing his life, Rosinante laid the groundwork for the current Law to emerge. 2. Robin. A lot of the times, the tragic value of a character's backstory lies in the biased and emotionally charged narrative. Considering the overall state of the world of One Piece, fans can conclude that it is indeed common for people to lose their loved ones due to unnatural causes. Nico Robin's backstory, however, is tragic in all sense of the word. One doesn't need to be emotionally attached to her to realize the severity of her experience, which involved child abuse and her island being eviscerated by the Marines. 1. Brook. Brook's case serves to underline Oda's genius writing. No one would have expected that he, a skeleton, was one of Laboon's old friends. And more importantly, no one would have expected that he, an ongoing and light-hearted individual, would have lived through such a tragedy. Brook's backstory unquestionably is one of the darkest in the series, if not the darkest. Brook had to watch his Rumbar Pirates crewmates die while knowing that his devil fruit would allow him to come back just so he could be all alone.